The Reich Chancellery, Berlin, May 24, 1940. The map room was as usual stiflingly hot, primarily thanks to the three men. Currently occupying it, the Führer, the perpetually anxious Army Group A commander, General Gerd von Rundstedt, and the man who currently seemed to occupy roughly 40% of the available oxygen, Reichsmarschall Hermann Goering. Goering had arrived not merely to convey a plan, but to deliver a spectacle. He stood before the large, strategic map of Flanders, his custom-tailored, cream-colored uniform straining visibly against the weight of his conviction and the previous evening's multi-course meal. He was glistening slightly, perhaps from the heat, perhaps from self-importance. "Gentlemen," Goering boomed, his voice vibrating the expensive crystal chandelier, "we are dealing with a logistical problem, not a military one." Von Rundstedt, whose face was permanently set in the expression of a man who suspected his trousers were about to fall down, muttered something about the impetuous nature of his Panzer commanders. Impetuous. Precisely. Goering gestured wildly at the map, pointing toward the rapidly shrinking Allied pocket around Dunkirk. Guderian and Rommel are magnificent bulls. Yes, but Flanders, mein Führer, is a china shop, and the floor is mud. Hitler, currently massaging temples, nodded wearily. The advance had been breathtaking, miraculous even. But the reports filtering in, reports of tanks running on fumes, supply convoys stuck kilometers behind the spearheads, and General Halder writing increasingly frantic diary entries were sobering. "The terrain is unsuitable," Hermann, Hitler agreed. "The drainage ditches alone would swallow a Panzer VI, and the men are exhausted. Exhausted men and exhausted machines." Goering seized the opportunity with the predatory swiftness of a shark smelling expensive perfume. Why risk our precious ground assets? Assets which must be saved for the inevitable glorious assault on Paris, when the problem can be solved by my eagles. He thrust out his chest, causing the elaborate metals sewn to his tunic to chime faintly, like miniature wind chimes in a slight breeze. The British are not escaping on battleships, Führer. They are scrambling onto what reconnaissance calls a regrettable assortment of civilian pleasure craft. Trawlers, fishing boats, perhaps even a badly maintained paddle steamer. They are sitting ducks, soft targets. Goering leaned in, lowering his voice conspiratorially, though it was still loud enough to shatter delicate china. "Give me command of the annihilation, mein Führer. Let Army Group A rest, refuel, and rearm. The Luftwaffe is fully stocked. The pilots are eager. I promise you this on the honor of a Reichsmarschall. Not a single British soldier will escape. The beaches will be a graveyard. Dunkirk, a pyre. It will be a victory for the air, a victory for me." Von Rundstedt coughed discreetly into his hand. He suspected that claiming Victoria for the Luftwaffe meant Goering intended to personally fly a Dornier 17 perhaps, while wearing a feathered helmet. But he remained silent. He desperately wanted his panzers to stop. Their impetuousness was giving him ulcers. Hitler looked, from the map to the anxious von Rundstedt, and then to the beaming, overconfident Goering. The idea had merit. Preserve armor, save fuel, and give the Luftwaffe the chance to finish the campaign quickly and spectacularly. "Very well," Hermann Hitler said, picking up a pen. "The Panzers, halt. You have 48 hours to demonstrate the supremacy of the Luftwaffe." Goering threw a salute, so energetic it nearly capsized a nearby inkwell. "Thank you, Führer. The sun sets on the British Empire today." In the corner, von Rundstedt privately wondered if the Luftwaffe could also manage to clear the thick, persistent fog that had been clinging to the Channel coast for the past 72 hours. He highly doubted it. Scene 2. The Panzer parking lot near Saint-Omer. General Heinz Guderian was not enjoying his mandatory rest. He sat on the turret of his command Panzer, the picture of fury. Idleness, tossing pebbles into a nearby drainage ditch. Every few minutes, he would let out a sound like a constipated rhinoceros. A rest cure. He spat the words out like rusty shrapnel. A mandatory rest cure. We are 40 kilometers from total final victory. I can practically smell the salt spray. Across the field, General Erwin Rommel was attempting to polish a pair of binoculars that were already pristine. Rommel was equally restless, having resorted to meticulously organizing the shells in a Panzer IV that wasn't even his. It is an insult to the art of motorized warfare, Heinz Rommel sighed, snapping binoculars case shut with exaggerated force. We have the British by the throat, and the order comes down, stop choking them. And why? Guderian threw a pebble so hard it skipped 3 times before vanishing into the mud. Because the fat peacock in Berlin, to prove that his overgrown hobby club can do the job. Goering, he knows as much about combat aerodynamics as he knows about calorie counting. A young radio operator scurried up, looking pale. Generals, sir, a dispatch just came in from General Halder's headquarters. Rommel took the paper and read it quickly, his face darkening with every word. Listen to this, Heinz. Writes the Air Force, on which all hopes are pinned, is dependent on the weather. Dependent on the weather? We are dependent on nothing but fuel and momentum. We are the weather. A Panzerspitze is a meteorological event in itself. Guderian gripped the side of the turret until his knuckles were white. They are escaping, Erwin. Every minute we spend sitting here counting dandelions, thousands of British are being loaded onto anything that floats. Rommel pointed to a massive pile of abandoned British equipment visible just down the road. A literal hill of motorcycles, trucks, and artillery guns left behind in haste. Of the retreat. Look at that harvest. Untold riches, the spoils of war. We could be rolling those out tomorrow, repainting them, and putting them straight to use. And Goering claims he will bomb this. Rommel swept his hand towards the mountain of materiel. He will reduce perfectly serviceable artillery pieces to scrap metal, just to satisfy his monstrous vanity. A nearby Panzer. Crew was attempting to play a leisurely game of cards, but Guderian's presence made leisurely impossible. He paced furiously, occasionally kicking their deck into the air. This is not a rest, Erwin Guderian hissed. This is torture. We are mere kilometers away from the largest encirclement victory in history, and we have been relegated to the role of glorified stationary parade floats. Be patient, Heinz Rommel advised, though his own twitching eye suggested patience was the last thing he possessed. Perhaps the Luftwaffe will be quick. Perhaps they will be efficient. Perhaps the weather will cooperate. Guderian simply stared at him. You are right, Rommel conceded instantly. That will never happen. We must wait until the High Command recognizes the folly of placing their faith in a man whose greatest military accomplishment is fitting into a custom-built cockpit. The two generals spent the rest of the afternoon staring intensely toward the coast, hoping that sheer willpower alone could override Hitler's catastrophic order. All they heard was the distant, muffled sound of anti-aircraft fire, suggesting the Luftwaffe was at least trying. Scene 3. Jagdgeschwader 51. Airfield, northern France. Lieutenant Günther Klemms, a medium bomber pilot flying a Heinkel HE-111, was currently doing 3 things: sweating profusely, swearing quietly, and desperately trying to locate the navigational charts he was sure he had left under his pillow. Klaus Günther whispered to his radio operator. who was attempting to consume a stale sausage roll. Did you see my charts? The ones for Dunkirk. They are crucial for calculating the minimum safe height for dropping ordnance, while avoiding hitting our own reconnaissance. Planes, Klaus wiped grease onto his already dubious uniform. Didn't need them, Gunther. The mission briefing was quite specific. Fly west until you see a large gray expanse. Fly over the expanse until you see mist. Then drop bombs where you think the British are, and return immediately before you run out of fuel. Precisely, Gunther grumbled. The Heinkel is a marvel of German engineering, but its range is calculated for strategic targets, not for what amounts to a high-speed round-trip commute to the Channel coast. The mission briefing room was a haze of nervous cigarette smoke and the deep, abiding pessimism of men who understood aerodynamics better than their superiors. The fighter pilots of the Bf-109 squadron were already complaining. 20 minutes of loiter time, maximum, one Messerschmitt pilot griped loudly. If we hit heavy flak, we have to abort the attack run immediately, or we won't have the petrol to cross the Meuse on the way back. It's insane. I spend more time waiting for the fuel bowser than I do over the target. The commanding officer, a visibly weary Hauptmann, tapped his pointer against a blurry photograph of Dunkirk harbor. Gentlemen, Reichsmarschall Goering has guaranteed that we will annihilate the pocket. Your duty is clear. However, the Hauptmann paused, dropping his voice to a realistic drone. The weather forecast is poor. Very low ceiling, 9/10 cloud cover, and persistent thick maritime fog that should make navigation a delightful challenge. Gunther leaned toward Klaus. So cold-blooded, killing done blind and on a tight schedule. Just what the Heinkel was designed for. Klaus shrugged. Think of the propaganda value, Gunther. Luftwaffe conquers the elements. If I fly through enough fog, I will conquer an iceberg, not the Royal Navy, Gunther retorted. Heinkel He-111s were heavy twin-engine bombers. They were sturdy, carried a decent payload, but they were utterly incapable of rapid maneuvering, especially when fully loaded. They were essentially flying fuel tanks, with bomb bays excellent for reaching targets deep inside Poland, terrible for dodging nimble Spitfires and intense coastal flak. Target priority. The Hauptmann continued struggling to maintain eye contact with his miserable squadron. First, British ships. Second, British beaches. Third, anything that looks remotely British.
Yes.
The Heinkel crews lumbered out to their aircraft. Gunther performed his checklist with mechanical precision. He knew this aircraft backwards, and what he knew was that in conditions like these, the odds of scoring a verifiable strategic hit were infinitesimally small. The odds of being blinded by a combination of anti-aircraft smoke, engine fumes, and thick, wet fog, however, were approaching 100%. Ready, Klaus? Gunther asked, strapping in. As ready as one can be to waste 1,500 liters of strategic fuel on a 50-50 chance of sinking a lifeboat. Gunther. They taxied onto the grass runway. All around them, the air was already vibrating with the sound of hundreds of engines winding up. Junkers, Messerschmitts, Dorniers. Goering had indeed thrown everything he had at Dunkirk. The sound was deafening, the promise loud, arrogant, and almost certainly hollow. Scene 4. Over the Channel coast. The first few hours of the operation, dubbed Operation Paula internally, or Operation Goering's ego trip by the disgusted generals on the ground, were a masterpiece of frustration. Gunther's Heinkel, der Fliegende Sardine, the Flying Sardine, an affectionate nickname due to its shape, clawed its way through the dense, low-hanging clouds. It was May 24th, and the weather gods, apparently working for the Royal Air Force, had ensured the air above the channel was less air and more a dense, gray, cold soup. Altitude check, Klaus, Gunther yelled over the engine. 7 meters. Ceiling visibility, 0. Klaus reported, sounding thoroughly damp. I haven't seen the ground in 20 minutes. Are we sure we are over France?
I can't see anything.
We must be, Gunther replied, squinting at the glass. smooth white expanse. Outside, if we were over Germany, the weather would be perfect. Goering would be here in a ceremonial glider and we'd be bombing. A perfectly clear target range. Suddenly, a massive shudder ran through the Heinkel. The rattle of light shrapnel against the fuselage sounded like heavy rain on a tin roof. Flak light. Maybe 40 millimeters, Klaus screamed. We must be getting close. Gunther fought the controls, trying to maintain level flight. Below them, dozens of Allied destroyers and naval vessels were turning the lower cloud layer into an angry, blossoming storm of black smoke. The concentration of defensive fire was terrifying. They're not even trying to hide, Gunther swore. They're just sitting there, pouring shells into the clouds. They can't see? Us, we can't see them. This is just expensive target practice. A Spitfire, appearing as a sudden impossible flash of light gray, sliced past the Heinkel's starboard wingtip, vanishing immediately back into the cloud bank. Fighter engagement, Klaus yelled unnecessarily. Did he see us? He saw the smell of our heavy bomber. Gunther corrected, fighting the turbulence. The Heinkel was entirely out of its element. It was slow and clumsy, meant for altitude and distance. Down here, skimming the cloud layer, it was just a big, fat target. Gunther navigated purely by compass and the intermittent flashes of light below. They had reached the target zone. Time for the attack run. Bombardier, get ready, Gunther called. I'm going to drop down slightly and see if I can find a hole in this miserable insulation layer. He pushed the nose down, dropping rapidly. The G-forces pressed him momentarily into his seat. The Heinkel burst through the bottom of the cloud layer at 500 meters. What Gunther saw was utter chaos, rendered indistinct by the swirling sea mist. The beaches were packed, yes, but visibility was perhaps 800 meters. The British were efficient, moving rapidly, and the air was saturated with flak and the screaming whine of other German aircraft, also trying and failing to pinpoint specific targets. He spotted movement, a large shape heavily laden, moving slowly towards the shallow water. Target acquired, Gunther yelled, sweat stinging his eyes. Looks like a steamer, large civilian type, probably full of retreating officers. He banked the heavy bomber, struggling to line up the sights. The vibrations from the engines and the near-constant shell bursts made holding the trajectory impossible. Steady, steady. He reached the point of release, now or never. Bombs away. The Heinkel lurched upwards as the weight was suddenly released. Gunther pulled up immediately, desperate to regain the safety of the clouds before the destroyers below could find their range. Did we hit it? Klaus. Confirmed kill. Klaus peered down through the haze. He squinted, trying to make sense of the scene below. There was a plume of smoke, definitely. And a small, surprisingly jaunty-looking vessel was definitely beginning to list violently. Affirmative, Gunther. Klaus reported, trying to sound professional. Direct hit. Target sinking rapidly. Name. Appears to be the Jolly Wench. Gunther sighed. He had just used a 1,000-kilogram strategic bomb to sink a boat named the Jolly Wench. Was it carrying troops? No, Gunther. Looks like a lot of nets and fish. Definitely fish. Klaus paused. And maybe one very angry shouting man in a thick woolen sweater. Gunther slumped. His first mission of the great Luftwaffe annihilation effort, and he had successfully provided the English Channel with a spectacular and deeply regrettable fish dinner. Well, Gunther muttered, turning the flying sardine around toward home. At least we won't need to refuel immediately. We must conserve the precious fuel for the next futile attempt. Scene 5. Back at the airfield and the High Command. When? Gunther landed hours later, utterly exhausted. The atmosphere at the airfield was grim. Hundreds of sorties had been flown, but the results were laughably poor. Most pilots had dumped their ordnance blindly, or returned with full loads due to zero visibility. Claim anything. Gunther, a ground crewman, asked, helping him out of the cockpit. I claimed a confirmed sinking of a fishing trawler. Gunther admitted honestly. I believe it was armed with a bucket and a very sharp hook. Nonsense, the crewman beamed, already pulling out the logbook. We write down, one large transport vessel, likely carrying priority personnel, destroyed in spectacular fashion by superior Heinkel crew. Crew confirmed seeing large plume of smoke and secondary explosions. But there were no secondary explosions. There is always a secondary explosion, Lieutenant. Especially when Reichsmarshal Goering is reading the reports. Meanwhile, back at his opulent headquarters far from the front, Goering was ecstatic. The numbers were being massaged, inflated, and then surgically altered beyond all recognition. 4,000 tons of shipping destroyed, thousands of enemy personnel eliminated. The British are reeling, Führer. Goering crowed over the telephone to Hitler, conveniently ignoring the fact that his planes had lost 3 times the number of expected fighters, and that the overall effect on the evacuation was minimal due to the pervasive fog. Hitler, hearing the numbers, felt a momentary surge of justification. Perhaps Goering wasn't entirely useless. Scene 6. Day 2 of the Halt. The Panzer parking lot. Guderian was no longer pacing. He was attempting to disassemble and reassemble the engine of his personal Kübelwagen. Purely out of boredom, Rommel was timing him with a stopwatch. 16 seconds, Heinz, a personal best. Rommel shouted. See? This enforced rest is improving your small motor skills. Guderian slammed the hood shut. I do not wish to improve my small motor skills, Irvin. I wish to flatten things with large motors. Just then, a messenger arrived with the official casualty reports and operational summary from the Luftwaffe for the first 24 hours. Rommel took the report. Ah, the glory of the Luftwaffe. Let us see how the annihilation is progressing. Rommel began to read, his eyes widening in disbelief. Goering reports overwhelming success, claiming hundreds of kills. He even claims that our planes achieved a favorable kill ratio in every encounter, despite losing numerous fighters due to unforeseen atmospheric conditions. Atmospheric conditions, Guderian scoffed. He means the sky was inconveniently full of English shells and fog. Wait, listen to this, Rommel continued, pointing to a section marked logistical gains. The evacuation effort is paralyzed, and all remaining British equipment on the beaches will be systematically destroyed from the air within 48 hours. Guderian grabbed the report and marched straight to the pile of abandoned British equipment, which 2 days later looked even larger. He lifted a pristine, fully fueled motorcycle. Paralyzed, you say? Hermann Guderian roared, shaking the report at the clouds. This machine runs perfectly. This is not paralyzed. This is ours, and it has not been systematically destroyed by a single bomb, you pompous fraud. The mood amongst the ground commanders who could hear the distant drone of planes that sounded more frustrated than dominant was rapidly shifting, from reluctant obedience to open burning insubordination. General Halder's diary entry that evening perfectly captured the mood. The bad weather has grounded our Air Force, and now we must stand by and watch how countless thousands of the enemy are getting away to England, right under our noses. Hitler's decision, fueled by Goering's colossal ego, was turning into one of the most agonizing weights in military history. The 48-hour reprieve granted to the Panzers was almost up. But the crucial window of opportunity, the one where the encirclement was tightest and the British were most panicked, had been handed over to the weatherman. That evening, as Gunther prepared for another blind fog-shrouded flight, Rommel and Guderian sat in silent, simmering fury, listening to the crackle of distant radio chatter. They're still sailing, Heinz Rommel murmured. They're still leaving. In droves. Guderian simply stared at the coast 7 miles away. He knew that. The moment the Panzers were unleashed again, the remaining British would fight like cornered animals, turning those few kilometers into a bloody, difficult slog. And all because a fat man in a ridiculous uniform had promised to command the weather. Cliffhanger. May 26th arrived with the relentless gray gloom still hugging the French coast. But in Berlin, the mounting reports of the lack of annihilation finally caused a shift in the delicate balance of power Hitler was losing. Patience, with Goering's excuses about local meteorological treason. The Panzer's chains were finally, and reluctantly, being loosened. The order has been rescinded, von Rundstedt informed his staff, his face a mix of relief and dread. We advance, but the delay had cost precious time. As the German ground forces prepared to surge forward, something else happened. General Fedor von Bock, to the east, decided he was tired of waiting for the Panzers. He launched a massive, unexpected attack across the Ypres-Commune Canal. The battle for Dunkirk was about to shift from a comedic disaster in the air to a desperate, ferocious bloodbath on the ground. And up in the sky, Günther Klemms, oblivious to the momentous change below, was wrestling his Heinkel through a brief, surprising break in the clouds. Below him, he saw the faint, telltale wake of an untold number of British ships steaming safely toward England. Klaus Günther yelled, pointing at the sight. "Look, they are getting away!" "No, Günther," Klaus corrected, peering at his revised mission report. According to the official logs, these are merely phantom, ships created by atmospheric disturbances. Günther knew better. They weren't phantoms. They were proof of a colossal, catastrophic failure. And as the fog finally began to dissipate, the German ground troops would have to pay the bloody price for Goering's hubris.